Today I'll be going over Alanna Nash's book, The Colonel. We'll be going over chapter 11, which is titled Elvis Makes Pitchas. One Saturday night in 1956, Joseph Hazen got a phone call while he was in his apartment. It was his neighbor, Harriet Ames, who said, "Joe, look at this fellow on the television, Elvis Presley. He's a terrific dancer. He's quite a character." Hazen saw Elvis on the Dorsey Brothers stage show and immediately called producer Hal Wallace in California, urging him to watch. Hazen already had a connection to Hal Wallace from his earlier years as a Warner Brothers lawyer in New York. He had met Wallace, a successful Warner production chief, during a routine California trip. Hazen was Walter Annenberg's son-in-law and had built a working relationship with Wallace. The two would agree to a 60-40 partnership to produce films independently, with Wallace handling creative and Hazen handling finances, and Paramount as the distributor. The next day after Elvis' stage show performance, Hazen contacted the William Morris office in New York about getting Elvis under contract, and Wallace became convinced Elvis had screen potential. Wallace remembers, "There was something about his eyes, a solemn look, an expressive face, a new personality that I knew was definitely star material for the screen." Parker, however, stayed cautious and non-committal. He told Wallace Elvis would probably be in California soon and might consider a meeting. Wallace wrote in his book, "I knew instinctively that the Colonel was interested, but playing it cool." What Wallace didn't know was that Parker had been aware of Wallace for years, back when Parker was still working as a dog catcher in Tampa, and a Warner Brothers crew came to town to film Air Force. Nash writes, quote, "Through the years, Parker had obsessed about the producer, envying his power and his wealth. He'd followed Wallace's move to Paramount through the trade papers and fantasized about a day when he would come to Hollywood with an act so big that a man like Wallace would be eating out of his hand." End quote. Parker deliberately booked Elvis into Paramount-controlled theaters in Florida and on the East Coast so Paramount executives would hear how big the crowds were. Nash says Parker, now 46 years old, saw Hollywood as a way to elevate both Elvis and himself. He wanted more than money or fame for Elvis. He wanted power, respect, and a larger-than-life legend of his own. Nash writes, quote, "He would become, in effect, too big to be touched, able to forget that he was an illegal alien with no papers. In doing so, Parker would be in his total glory, conducting his professional negotiations and personal manipulations with the outrageous, swashbuckling bravado of a pirate. At no other time would he ever be funnier, deadlier, or as obviously pathological in his business dealings." End quote. Parker fixated his discontent on Hal Wallace. Wallace represented the kind of powerful, successful Hollywood authority figure Parker both resented and wanted to surpass. To Parker, Wallace was the symbol of every Jewish son of immigrants who had achieved the American success Parker craved for himself. He didn't just want acceptance from powerful Hollywood men like Wallace. He wanted to dominate them, using pressure, manipulation, and cunning to prove he was smarter and more powerful than they were. Geez, talk about an ego. Nash writes, quote, "When Wallace followed up to set a date for Elvis' screen test, Parker did what only came naturally. He refused to take his calls. The producer, swearing later that nothing would stop me from signing this boy for films, telephoned and telegraphed the Colonel to the point of exasperation. Hazen, who began to envision that part of his job might be to manage the man who managed the star, likewise began a futile telephone campaign." End quote. Parker finally entered into preliminary contractual agreements that brought Elvis to Paramount for a screen test in March 1956. Even though Elvis had only received the material the night before, he performed 2 dramatic scenes from The Rainmaker, which would star Burt Lancaster and Katharine Hepburn. For a musical piece, Elvis was given a prop guitar and told to lip-sync Blue Suede Shoes. Elvis' screen test surprised RCA executive Steve Scholes and Chick Crumpacker. They saw that Elvis had real acting potential, natural, direct, and emotionally intense in a way that reminded them of James Dean or Marlon Brando. Crumpacker remembers, "My God, we were agog. It was the talk of the place." Joe Hazen was equally shocked and wrote a memo to Wallace on June 11, 1956, that Elvis's meteoric rise is unquestionably a freak situation, but that still does not detract from the fact that as a straight actor, the guy has great potentialities. Hazen would later tell Parker that Elvis should sing in movies, but his dramatic abilities and talents should be carefully and steadily developed so he can do strong dramatic parts as well as sing. Wallace didn't necessarily share those feelings. He said years later, "The idea of tailoring Elvis for dramatic roles is something that we never attempted. We didn't sign Elvis as a second Jimmy Dean. We signed him as a #1 Elvis Presley." Nash writes, quote, "Parker went along with it for 2 reasons. First, he saw Presley's movie career primarily as a vehicle for selling concert tickets and records, and, more important, privately he had little faith in Elvis's acting abilities, even though Presley frequently recited whole scenes of Dean's Rebel without a cause, trying to convince his manager that he could carry a dramatic film, end quote. When Elvis arrived in Los Angeles for his screen test, Parker, Tom Diskin, and Leonard Hershin, Elvis's William Morris agent, were waiting for him at the airport. Even though Elvis was already a major sensation, Hershin, who was also known as Lenny, saw him step off the plane with the camera around his neck looking more like a country tourist than a Hollywood star. Hershin, still relatively new at William Morris, helped negotiate what became a notorious Elvis film contract. Acting on the advice that Elvis's fame might fade quickly, he pushed Parker to accept Wallace and Hazen's offer. One movie with options for 6 more. Nash says the 7-picture deal sounded bigger than it really was. It only truly guaranteed one film, let Parker make outside movies elsewhere, 1 per year, and paid Elvis like an unknown actor, starting at just $15,000 for the first picture, $20,000 for the second, $25,000 for the third, and up to $100,000 for the 7th. On top of that, the contract gave Elvis very little protection status. It had no guaranteed billing, no script approval, and no special perks, but Elvis and Parker still signed it with Wallace and Hazen on April 2nd, 1956. Okay, so why did Parker agree to sign this contract then? This early Wallace contract later improved and was rewritten in 1958, but Parker never got over it. Even though it led to Loving You and King Creole, he resented the original terms and carried that grudge through Elvis's Hollywood career. Parker felt humiliated by the Wallace deal because it made Elvis look underpaid and undervalued. He was furious that the contract fell below Screen Actors Guild minimums, $25,000 a year salary, and that Elvis's co-stars Wendell Corey and Elizabeth Scott earned more. In response, Parker used what would become one of his favorite power moves, threatening to pull Elvis from the film. Nash writes, quote, while Parker was grateful to Abe Lasvogel and the Morris Agency for representing him through the Eddie Arnold era, he realized in this first real lesson about the agency-studio relationship that the Morris office gave him poor advice. When the Colonel demanded to renegotiate, Lasvogel tried everything he could to convince him to take less money, remembers Byron Raphael. He also saw that a major talent agency with hundreds of clients would not risk its relationship with the movie companies over the fate of a single star, end quote. But Parker still needed William Morris and Lasvogel because, under California law, only an agent could finalize studio deals, not a manager. Even though Parker disliked depending on others, the agency gave Elvis access to Hollywood and prestige bookings, including the New Frontier in Las Vegas, where Parker had already embarrassed them by demanding cash up front. By way of explanation, Parker said, no check is good. Some are pretty good, but they got an atom bomb testing place out there in the desert. What if some feller pressed the wrong button? From then on, he never fully trusted William Morris agents after that deal. He especially blamed Lenny Hershin and carried a grudge against him, making Hershin a target of Parker's revenge-minded way of doing business. Parker initially acted friendly with the agents, telling his usual carnival stories. One story showed his extreme thrift. During the Eddie Arnold years, he sent a boy to collect souvenir books people had left behind. Parker bragged, sold them again at the next stop. His wild carny stories made people unsure what was true and what was performance. William Morris, an RCA insider, saw him as so strange and slippery that even absurd rumors, like the claim he had married a bearded lady, seemed almost believable. The gossip made him look more ridiculous than intimidating. Nash says Parker's clownish stories helped disguise how angry and resentful he really was. Beneath the carnival humor, he was turning hostile toward William Morris and began taking it out by publicly embarrassing their agents. He used Elvis's Pan-Pacific show in October 1957 to humiliate William Morris executives. When its president, Sam Weisbord, asked for 25 free tickets, Parker begrudgingly sent only 3, one for Weisbord and the others for Lasvogel and Norman Brokaw, who headed the West Coast television department. And instead of giving them VIP seats in the front row, he placed the powerful agents, none who were taller than 5'3", far in the back. Parker kept Elvis tightly controlled during Loving You. When Hazen and Wallace wanted Elvis to meet with co-writer Herbert Baker, Parker refused and had Lasvogel tell them that Parker insisted all communication go through him, claiming Elvis wanted to avoid business or professional contacts. He was also quick to interpret things as insults. When no Paramount representative attended Elvis's June 1956 Shrine Auditorium show during a period of heavy public criticism, Parker took it as a sign that the studio had lost interest in Elvis. Hazen pushed back, reminding Parker it was not customary to attend every performer's opening night and that he and Wallace had already shown interest in Elvis by attending his April Las Vegas debut at the New Frontier, and that Wallace tried to invite Elvis to dinner at his home several times and also lunch at the Paramount Commissary. But Parker would not be satisfied. By then, he knew he held the power. Hazen began to see how unpleasant and difficult Parker could be, and Parker's abrasive behavior worried Hazen enough that he wrote a memo to Hal Wallace about how Parker has a peeve about neglect. Wallace and Hazen quickly grew frustrated with Parker's tactics. Privately, Wallace found him so difficult and manipulative that he said he would rather negotiate with the devil, and Hazen stating, "I wouldn't be 100 feet away from him. He's an obnoxious, terrible man. Terrible man." Nash says Parker enjoyed frustrating Hollywood executives because it made him feel in control. But underneath that cool exterior, he was offended by something Joe Hazen had said about Love Me Tender, Elvis's first film, which was made at 20th Century Fox through the Wallace-Hazen loan-out arrangement. A month earlier, Hazen previewed Love Me Tender before its release to judge what kind of movie Elvis had made. When Parker came to New York for Elvis's second Ed Sullivan Show appearance, Hazen met with him and Harry Kalheim at the Warwick Hotel. Nash writes, quote, "As Elvis's first film, Hazen said Love Me Tender would probably do very big business. But," he added, "very confidentially and as man to man, neither Wallace nor Paul Nathan, Wallace's associate producer, was particularly impressed with it. In fact, they'd considered it crap." The Colonel bristled and responded that the studio was making some changes that he had recommended, end quote. Parker believed the same methods he used to sell Elvis's live appearances could be applied to Love Me Tender and make the movie more successful. Parker became interested in Love Me Tender after Buddy Adler, Fox's new top executive, contacted him. Adler had just replaced Daryl Zanuck, making him Fox's top executive. Freddie Beanstalk, the Aberbach's younger cousin, became Elvis's liaison with Hill and Range Music, and he remembers, "Buddy Adler told him he'd just gotten this fantastic property. He said it would make Elvis a movie star and he'd like to send the Colonel the script. The Colonel said, 'There's no sense in sending me the script because I can't read. The only thing I'm interested in is how much you're gonna pay me.'" Adler pushed back by arguing Elvis was still untested as an actor, and from the studio's view, casting him was a financial risk. Adler told him, "We'll give you $25,000. According to Beanstalk, Parker said, "That's exactly what I want. Now, how much are you going to pay Elvis?" Parker wanted to ask for $1 million for Elvis's movie deal, even though no star was earning that for one film. The number mattered to Parker because it sounded powerful and bold, exactly the image he wanted to create. Adler, shocked, said, "Not even Jack Lemmon gets that." Parker told him, well, maybe he needs a new manager. Parker called Abe Lasvogel right away and demanded $1 million up front for Elvis to make Adler's Civil War drama, The Reno Brothers, but privately, Parker would have been satisfied with $100,000. Lasvogel was shocked by Parker's bold $1 million demand, but told him he could still get Elvis a better deal than Paramount. Fox eventually offered $75,000 plus top billing above the title, but Parker, who had started to insist on one-page contracts, refused to budge. He disliked the studio's complicated terms about grosses and percentages, and he felt like they were doing it to confuse him. Lasvogel told him, "Better take this, Tom. Believe me, this is as high as they're going." Parker knew the film needed Elvis in it, and he barked, "Go back to him and tell them to give the Colonel the money he wants, and they won't have to give Elvis any billing." Nash writes, quote, "In the end, Elvis received the target price of $100,000 and co-star credit and, at Parker's insistence, the written promise of a bonus if the picture grossed more than $5 million. Fox also took an option for two other films, Flaming Star and Wild in the Country, at $150,000 and $200,000. But Parker lived for the day when the studios would have to pay his $1 million demand. "Elvis makes pitches," he took to saying to himself as a sort of maniacal mantra, end quote. Leonard Hirschen helped find Love Me Tender and finalize the deal, but he also learned from Parker's hardball style. Parker taught him not to panic or accept too quickly. Hirschen remembers, "Whenever I said, 'Colonel, if we don't take this, we're going to lose it,' the Colonel said, 'You can't lose it. You never had it.'" Hirschen respected Parker and thought at the time that Parker was helping Elvis, but he missed what Lasvogel understood. Parker saw himself as the real client, not Elvis, and, in Parker's mind, believed Elvis's personal wishes should not have been Hirschen's concern. Parker pushed Hirschen out of future negotiations because he disliked him and saw him as an obstacle. From then on, Parker wanted Lasvogel handling Elvis's movie deals, but only under the terms Parker dictated. He made sure Elvis's movie deals benefited him personally, too. For Love Me Tender, he secured perks like an office on the Fox lot, secretaries, and a car with a chauffeur whenever he wanted one. At the time, unusual privileges for a star's manager. He turned his Fox office, what he called the Elvis Exploitation Office, into a carnival-like command center for selling Elvis. It was filled with balloons, stuffed animals, and Elvis merchandise, and Parker even used a toy dog to summon his staff. 1 bark for Secretary Trude Forscher, 2 barks for Byron Raphael, and 3 barks for Tom Diskin. Sometimes he would bark himself. Parker's Fox office was also partly theater. He wanted everyone to look constantly busy, even if the work was meaningless, and he filled the day with odd tasks like writing letters, his favorite, making paper dolls, and counting the sausages he got from Whitey Ford, the Duke of Paducah, that he gave as gifts to Hollywood stars from Bing Crosby to Ray Bolger. Parker used the Fox office as a stage for pranks and psychological games. If Hollywood executives saw him as a crude country bumpkin, Parker leaned into that image, then used it to outmaneuver them and prove he could outcon the biggest sharks in Hollywood. One day, when studio heads Buddy Adler and Lou Schreiber were coming to meet him, Parker gathered his staff and prepared to stage another one of his calculated power games. Nash writes, quote, Parker wanted it to be an event they'd never forget. First, he ordered a sign to read, Colonel Parker's West Coast office, which he placed over the men's room door. Then he stationed everyone in his place. Diskin and Byron were to pick up the phone and make imaginary calls, while Trude was to look studiously secretarial. Then he installed Elvis's corpulent friend Arthur Hooton in the shower with a steno pad and a stool, end quote. Parker told them, if anybody laughs, you'll be sent back to wherever you came from. Then he greased the doorknobs with one of Whitey Ford's country sausages and then hid in the men's room. Byron Raphael remembers, when Adler and Schreiber came in, Trude told them that the colonel was waiting for them in his West Coast office. Adler opened the door to the men's room. Raphael says Adler found the colonel sitting on the toilet with his pants down and this gigantic fat guy in the shower pretending to take dictation. The colonel said, come on in, close the door, don't worry about anything. Adler tried to stay composed while Parker talked business from on the toilet, and Lou Schreiber was so shocked he said nothing. Raphael remembers, after about 5 minutes, Adler and Schreiber started to smell something horrendous on their hands because they'd handled the doorknobs. You can imagine what they thought, but they didn't want to embarrass anybody. They just wanted to get out of there, and the colonel just kept talking, keeping them there as long as possible. They didn't know what to do. They were in shock. Parker finally let them leave, and everyone burst into laughter. Then, in typical Parker fashion, he followed the humiliation with a grand gesture. He called Ed Dodelin at RCA and had him send Adler and Schreiber expensive television sets, courtesy of Elvis and the Colonel. Nash writes, quote, Parker's antics with the Hollywood power brokers brought a measure of humor to a staid and conservative industry. But the Colonel's need to diminish and degrade, to terrorize grown men all around him, also served to intimidate them into submission, end quote. Parker used Elvis's first film Nerves as a reason to get himself onto the Love Me Tender set, telling producer David Weisbart that a familiar face on set would call him Elvis. Once Weisbart allowed it, Parker pushed further, even asking whether he could receive screen credit. Weisbart sent a memo to Adler that read, in part, he's so cooperative with us on everything pertaining to Presley that I thought this would not be a bad idea. It can read Technical Advisor, Colonel Tom Parker. Adler kept trying to appease Parker after the bathroom prank, even giving him gold cufflinks. So Adler approved it, creating the precedent for Parker to receive credit on all of Elvis's future films. Now Parker used his growing influence on Love Me Tender to tighten control over Elvis. He wanted visitors limited, even Fox executives, and made it clear that all access to Elvis had to go through him. Instead of the studio contacting Elvis directly, Parker arranged for Trude Forscher to phone Elvis at the Beverly Wilshire with his morning call time. He especially tried to freeze out Leni Hershen, even though Hershen was still Elvis's official film agent. Parker feared Hershen and Peter Shaw, Hershen's colleague, might undermine him, so he used Elvis's entourage to alert him whenever Hershen came near the studio. If either man suggested meeting up for breakfast, Parker would say, sure, 6 a.m. He knew that it would be too early for a Hollywood agent who had been up late the night before. Parker was often paranoid about people having hidden motives, but in this case, he wasn't entirely wrong. Byron Raphael suggests that inside the William Morris office, some people really did have agendas that threatened Parker's control over Elvis. According to Raphael, many agents disliked Parker so much that if they could have taken Elvis away from him, they probably would have. Parker understood how the agency world worked. Agents built personal bonds with stars so they could keep control if a manager became a problem. Many agents became managers themselves, and with an established relationship in place, they knew they could easily pull a star from a manager who was already taking a big percentage of his earnings. Nash writes, quote, Parker, who also feared the college-educated Morris agents might influence Elvis's decisions, made sure that no one at the agency had Elvis's private phone number, even though the agents had always called such stars as Robert Mitchum and Rita Hayworth directly. And on the movie set, where he would soon spend less time on each picture, Parker encouraged Elvis's happy-go-lucky cousins and friends from home, the entourage the press would eventually dub the Memphis Mafia, to keep an eye out for anyone who tried to get Elvis alone, especially Herschend, who insisted he was there only to make sure Elvis got everything he needed, end quote. Parker would eventually ban Herschend from showing up on set, and after Elvis's army years would have him cut off from contact completely. Herschend remembers, because I was developing too much of a relationship with Elvis. Also, my thinking process were not his in terms of the kind of pictures that I would have gotten for Elvis and that Elvis wanted to do. Nash writes, quote, to Elvis, Parker explained it differently. You can't trust people in this town, he said. There are Jews here, and Jews are going to take advantage of you. In the future, when the Jewish explanation wasn't applicable, Parker scared Elvis away from would-be advisors by insinuating they were homosexual, end quote. Elvis stayed out of the business side partly because he trusted Parker and partly because Parker kept him there. Joe Hazen saw early that Parker was not just protecting Elvis, he was guarding access to him and withholding information Elvis had a right to know. Hazen felt Parker possessed him. If Elvis had a lawyer on his own, there would have been no Parker. No lawyer would have permitted Parker to take over a client like he did. Elvis believed Love Me Tender would be a serious dramatic role, and he did not want to sing in film, saying, I want to be the kind of actor that stays around for a long time. But he soon learned that Parker and RCA had other priorities. Adding 4 songs helped sell records, promote the film, and give RCA material for a crucial new album. Elvis felt misled and hurt when he realized the film would include songs after all. He was already overwhelmed by how quickly everything was moving, and the harsh criticism of his stage performances had affected him so deeply that it made him cry. He said, I'd sooner cut my throat than be vulgar. You've seen my folks. They're respectable, God-fearing people. They wouldn't let me do anything vulgar. Elvis was under a lot of pressure at this point. He was trying to learn how to act in his first movie, he wasn't sleeping, and now Parker was telling him he might not even be able to use his own band on the soundtrack. Instead, Elvis would have to record with studio musicians, people he didn't have that same relationship with. Parker quietly told him, look, it's pretty easy. We do it this way, we make money. We do it your way, we don't make money. Elvis, who had carried this promise that he was going to lift his family out of poverty and who regularly heard Vernon warn him not to go against Parker, caved. He said, okay, let's make money. Parker was now pushing Fox around too. He had gained so much power that he started making demands that would shape the rest of Elvis's movie career, including insisting that the soundtrack songs go through Elvis's own publishing company, not the studios. This became part of the Elvis business model. Through Hill and Range, Elvis could get publishing money and sometimes co-writing credit along with Vera Mattson, who happened to be married to the film's musical producer Ken Darby, even when he didn't actually write the song. Going forward, Parker and the Aberbox favored songwriters who were willing to give up part of their royalties just to have Elvis record their music. Freddie Beanstalk remembers, for the first 12 years of his recording life, Elvis didn't look at a song unless I brought it to him. Parker and the Aberbox treated these cut-ins as normal business, even though today they would be seen as unethical. Parker saw this as good business, even though the setup was heavily tilted away from Elvis. The ownership breakdown was 40% went to Parker, 15% went to Elvis, 45% went to Parker's friends. And then Parker still took 25% commission from Elvis's 15% share. Parker justified it by saying Elvis was his only client. He had plenty to manage once Love Me Tender started filming, but his attention was elsewhere. While Elvis was thrown almost immediately into a difficult dramatic scene for the first scene of filming, Parker was busy on the phone with RCA and playing office pranks, including pretending to hypnotize staff into quacking, barking, or dancing for visitors. Elvis actually surprised people with how natural he was as an actor. Even though he wasn't the first choice, people on the Fox lot, including Mildred Dunnick, saw that he had real instinct and belief in the role. But the movie was being rushed because Elvis had appearances booked, and some at William Morris still thought his fame might not last. So instead of giving him the care a new actor needed, Fox pushed through quickly, sometimes filming him in one take and from angles that didn't flatter him. Nash writes, quote, a responsible manager would have spoken up about how his client looked in the dailies when the film was released. One critic compared Elvis to a sausage, another to a hunk of lamb, except that Parker didn't care about Elvis's development as an actor, only about how the film sold product and promoted the live shows, end quote. Parker sometimes seemed irritated by just how much attention Elvis got. One day, Trude Forsher, who understood why Elvis was so popular, said to Parker, "He has magnetism." Parker barked, "Magnetism? With all his magnetism, if I hadn't taken him off that truck, he would still be driving it." Thus, Parker allowed Elvis's first movie to be rushed, even though it went against what Elvis wanted artistically. That became the beginning of a pattern, Elvis wanting to grow as an actor, while Parker made choices based on money and speed. And commercially, Parker was right. Love Me Tender made its money back in less than 3 weeks. Parker saw the film not just as a movie, but as a record-selling machine, so he negotiated a new RCA deal. Elvis would get a $135,000 advance, a $1,000 weekly paycheck, and a 5% royalty. In exchange, Elvis had to make 10 promotional appearances for his recordings, either in person or through radio or TV. So right away, Elvis was sent back on the road through Texas, while Parker brought RCA executives to Houston to see just how powerful Elvis's live draw had become. Chet Atkins remembers, "He had an apartment down there. We were all sitting around, and he went into the kitchen and brought out a bowl. He had that accent, couldn't say ours, and he said, 'The Colonel's refrigerator is getting low on groceries, so I'm going to pass this bowl around, and I don't want to hear any silver or copper falling in it. I want to hear paper.' So everybody chipped in a few bucks, and he sent Bevo out to get some food. He loved separating people from their money." When Love Me Tender opened in New York on November 15, 1956, a giant 40-foot Elvis cutout was on the theater, and nearly 2,000 fans lined up, so many that the crowd stretched from Times Square toward 8th Avenue and disrupted traffic. The theater manager, Charles Einfeld, was thrilled and sent a telegram to Fox. It read, "Spread the news that we have a most sensational attraction." Parker helped manufacture the frenzy around Love Me Tender. He staged the crowd for newsreel cameras, gave fans Elvis for President buttons, and even supplied professional-looking signs that said, "Okay, Elvis, let's really go." And his advice to theaters was pure showman business. Clear the theater after every showing so each new crowd had to buy a fresh ticket. Parker couldn't wait to use Love Me Tender's success against Joe Hazen. He was still bitter about the Paramount deal, so when Paramount started developing Loving You, Parker bragged that Fox had employed him on Love Me Tender. Then he pushed the same idea with Paramount. Hazen wrote to Wallace that Parker asked as to how much money he was going to get, indicating that he should be employed in connection with the production of the photoplay, since he knew how to handle Presley. Parker kept pressuring Paramount by bragging about the money he was supposedly turning down elsewhere, including $75,000 for Elvis to sing 2 songs in another Fox film. His real goal was to make Wallace and Hazen raise Elvis's pay for Loving You. Eventually, after Abe Lasvogel made several calls, they agreed to give Elvis a $25,000 bonus, but that amount also included payment for Parker's own services. On January 17, 1957, Hazen wrote to Wallace explaining Paramount agreed to the $25,000 bonus and that it would be up to Parker and Elvis how it would be divided. By now, Parker wanted more than his normal 25% commission whenever Elvis benefited from a deal. Lasvogel told the producers Parker would give the whole bonus to Elvis because he could not or would not keep any of it personally. But Parker added if he was expected to come to Hollywood and stay through production, then the studio needed to pay him separately. Parker got exactly what he wanted. On February 7, 1957, the original $25,000 bonus had become an additional $50,000 paid to Elvis Presley and Colonel Parker. But Parker's own letter made clear that half of that $50,000, $25,000, was for him personally. And to justify that payment, a separate contract was created for Parker's cooperation, listing him as a technical advisor on Loving You. Nash writes, quote, "From then on, whenever Parker could justify a deal as a joint venture where he and Elvis functioned as equal partners beyond the contractually agreed amount, the Colonel would divide the proceeds 50-50 from the first dollar. They were a team, Elvis and the Colonel, Presley providing the talent and Parker, through persistence and ingenuity, converting that talent into one of the most lucrative careers in history," end quote. Parker's habit of signing things Elvis and the Colonel was not just cute branding, it was a power statement. He was putting himself beside Elvis almost as an equal, sending the message, "Elvis may be the star, but I am just as important, and if you want Elvis, you have to deal with me." Oscar Davis saw what Parker was doing and questioned whether all of it was really about Elvis or whether Parker was using Elvis's career to enrich and promote himself. Parker was shocked, but he didn't see it that way. In his mind, this was just hardball business, the kind of thing a former carny like Davis should have understood. Parker believed loyalty applied only inside his own circle. Anyone outside that circle, studios, agents, executives, was fair game. Parker shouted, "You want to tell me how I should do business? Listen, I have $350,000 in the bank. When you have $350,001 in your bank account, then you can come and tell me." So, by the way, the $350,000 is worth approximately $4,345,000 today. Anyway, Parker had become the largest single depositor at the American National Bank in Madison, Tennessee, and he was funneling Elvis-related money through his company, All-Star Shows. He had made visits to the bank in the 40s during the early Arnold years and introduced himself to the owner, who he only remembered as the only Jewish fella in Madison. Years later, Parker would tell the story. He needed a loan for $5,000 for promotion, but he had almost no collateral, just an old car he bought for $125 and was paying off at $4 a month. When the banker said the car had no value, Parker basically argued, if I don't pay you back, it doesn't matter what the car's worth anyway, right? The banker loaned him the money based on trust. Parker paid it back, and decades later, he still considered that bank his bank. Nash writes, the Colonel, Parker would tell anyone who would listen, was nothing if not loyal. That's it for Chapter 11. Stay tuned for Chapter 12, which is titled Directional Snowing. See you then.